week's episode of Advice for F-Holes is going to be brought to you by the Moscow Mule. I hope you are enjoying something as much as I am because we're going to be talking about intonation. And as much as vodka won't fix intonation, at least it makes it a little more palatable or you forget what you've been hearing all day. So join me and we're going to try to crack the code of how to get good intonation for ourselves and for our learners.
Welcome to Advice for F-Holes. I am so excited to talk to you about all things strings. We're going to talk to teachers, we're going to talk to performers, we're going to talk to learners of string instruments so that we can figure some of this shit out together. Because playing a string instrument is not always easy, and sometimes it's vaguely inappropriate. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a topic each week, we're going to pull it apart, and I'm going to say what I need to say, and then you're going to comment, and hopefully we'll figure some of this stuff out together. I'm your host, Tracy Emerson. I've been teaching strings for over 30 years. I started playing violin back in 3rd grade, and there are a lot of great things that I've learned over the years, a lot of great things I've shared over the years, and still so many things that I'm puzzled about. So I hope you'll join me on this adventure as we figure some of this out together.
Let's talk about intonation, F-holes. Let's figure this out, shall we? First of all, whole and half steps. There we go. That's where I'm going to concentrate all of our energy tonight, is figuring out what a whole and half step is. Honestly, I have a lot of students and a lot of amateur friends that play to a very high level, and they just don't get it, what a whole step and a half step is. So we can explain it. We can show them on a piece of paper, but I feel like we have to make it extra concrete. So visually, the piano is our best friend. Okay, so I feel like it shows them really clearly where you have a whole step between natural notes and there's this black key in the middle breaking them in half. Then of course E and F, B and C are those lucky spots where there is no black key in between, so they're already chummy. They're already half steps. There's no whole step involved with those. So showing it to them here is then going to make it a lot more concrete when you get to this long abstraction that we have. It's so concrete on piano. Okay. We often think about intonation and half and whole steps in terms of our ear. Got to train the ear. Got to train that ear. But there's more to it. We have more than one sense that's going to help with the ear training. It's going to help with intonation. So we tend to ignore the visual like that. We also tend to ignore the visual on our own instrument. So having those students playing guitar style for a little bit, or even yourself, just to see what are my whole and half steps really looking like. Are they really tight for half steps? Tight. Or are they gappy, which is not a good thing at all. So that feeling has to be there. That feeling of this is what a half step between my 2 and 3 feels like. Can I feel my fingernail with my 3rd finger? Okay, that is when I have a half step that's really tight and really clear. Whole step is a little bit more vague at times. So making sure that you have that spatial relation figured out. And sometimes I tend to think about where it's going to feel back here instead of here. Okay. So really actually looking at what your fingers are doing is helpful. So that's bringing the visual into it and the physical. I want you to feel where that half step is. Feel where that whole step is. Now, in 3rd grade, I had Mrs. Gallick for my modified Suzuki violin classes in school. It was fabulous. So one of her favorite stories, or my favorite stories of hers, was all about 2nd and 3rd finger. Wow, it's a thunderstorm out there. It's exciting. Second and third finger, hey, they're best friends. They're boyfriend and girlfriend. They like to kiss and hug each other all the time. See, they're really tight. They're close together. They're snuggly. Uh-oh. 2 and 3, they broke up. So now, 1 and 2, they're the hot item now. They are hugging, and now third finger's feeling really jilted and far away from them. Okay, so believe it or not, that was my introduction to what whole and half steps were. But it stuck, and it made it very physical in terms of, we call them kissing fingers sometimes, or hugging fingers. We could go down a really dark path with that, but we're not gonna. So making sure that those fingers have a relationship with each other, because that's what whole and half steps are. It's a relationship between these two notes. Okay, so once we kind of establish that really good, solid whole and half step situation with your fingers, we're partway there. I don't know about you, but I personally love playing stuff by ear, and I know a lot of students that do too. So a big issue I find with intonation is the slideys. The kids that know how it's supposed to sound, so magically they start playing it and it's a little out, so they just keep moving their fingers. That is not going to establish intonation. That's going to compensate for bad intonation, and there's a very big difference there. So good intonation starts in the right place. Correcting bad intonation is what we think we're doing right when we use our ear to correct it, but it's too late by then. So good intonation requires planning, thoughtful planning, and it also requires a physical response to what's going on. So we've talked about half steps between your fingers, but what about those whole steps? You know, that's always a nightmare on violin and viola. Is, let's say we've got a low 1, whole step 2, whole step 3, you know, B flat, C, D. Making sure that kids are aware that 2 and 3 are going to have a hard time making a whole step when they're not used to doing that whole step yet. And bringing that 1 back is going to make it harder yet to get that really, really established. So call it as you see it. Just say, hey, guess what? Suck it up, buttercup. That third finger is going to have to get a lot further away and going to have to start getting strengthened. There it is. So going from open string to third finger, elbow, elbow, elbow. Again, it has to be physical. So we have to practice our whole step. Okay, so making sure that intonation is more than just whole step distance between your fingers. It's also whole and half step going from string to string. That one has to be practiced so much because of that elbow adjustment that we skip over, especially when we're teaching in public school and we're just trying to get all the kids to unpack their instruments at the same time and stop falling out of their chairs because they're middle schoolers. They just do that all the time. I don't understand. So trying to get those string crossing intonation whole and half steps is another challenge and another thing we really have to practice with our students. When we're playing those whole and half steps in scales and we're making progress with them understanding, oh, hey, scales are just a formula. Oh, who knew a whole and half step? That's going to be another episode. Love the formula. So once we get that established in first position, so we're not even going to talk about the other positions, but the same principle applies, is you have to relearn in each position what those half and whole steps look like and feel like, because we already know what they sound like. Then we start talking about tempering pitches, because we don't play piano. It's not equal temperament, and it's going to sound wonky and out of tune if we don't talk about and really accentuate those really tight half steps from T to do. Very big whole step from fa to sol. I mean, oh, it just makes it so juicy. And it just sounds plain weird if you just say, well, if I memorize that I put my two on this tape right here, it'll always be in tune. Well, it depends on the key. It really does. So making sure that you're listening to a lot of really, really good music, great examples of your pieces, wonderful examples of scales, and talking to the kids about the fact that you want to just adjust it a tiny bit. We've talked about tempering pitches, and we will get way more detailed into that on another day. But I'm glad that we got to have this little chat. So thank you for joining me in our little crusade to make everybody play better in tune, one step at a time. See what I did there? Cheers.
Thank you for listening to Advice for F-Holes. Please subscribe and share your comments below so we can have a great conversation.